I want to kind of present something that hopefully will be helpful to all of you. I want to remind all of us, we are in a set of holy days. You and me are still contained, confined, operating within, maneuvering, and working in, living in a living metaphor. What am I talking about? The 50 days. Today is number 7, lest we forget. We have completed 1 set of 7. 6 sets are left. And there is truth to this. I mean, there is a real golden nugget for all of us to consider. I've already alluded to it a little bit there in passing. And that is that life is here today and gone tomorrow. Before you know it, putting all kidding aside, you are old. And you do have creaks and cracks where you didn't have creaks and cracks before, and aches and pains where you didn't have them before, and things are drooping and flipping and flopping in places that they shouldn't be flipping and flopping and drooping. And they didn't before, but now they are. And lo and behold, these things happen to us being that we are physical. And I've often thought, and I gave a sermon many years ago now, I guess perhaps even a half a dozen years ago, titled, Life is Like a Feast of Weeks. I don't know how many of you have listened to that presentation. It was kind of a takeoff of Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Well, life is like a feast of weeks because in all due respect, you have 67 years to live, according to the Bible. Now, I realize some of us are pushing the limit. Others of us have been blessed with years beyond 10, which is 70 years, and some are in our 80s, and even in some cases 90s and stuff, and hey, more power to you, and God bless you in that regard if you've been able to be blessed with so many years to be able to appreciate life of that magnitude. But the fact of it is, in that presentation, I likened the 7 sets of 7 to 7 decades. So in this particular situation that we're in right now, the metaphor, if you were from 0 to 10 years old, you would be, in that first decade. Now I'm 63, so I'm 6.3 weeks old. I'm pushing up on my 7th week. I'm looking for that resurrection. You know what I'm saying? Because Pentecost, that's what that's all about, right? The wave sheaf on Sunday, back about a week ago, Sunday, week from tomorrow, the wave sheaf, that was still all about Christ. That was still all about Christ. Passover, still all about Christ. What is it? It's the observance of his death. His death. The wave sheaf is about his acceptance in his resurrected form before the Father. Christ was the first of the first fruits. And so he's paved the way. The Father and him have solidified the program where now many sons and daughters can enter into the kingdom of God as born sons of God. That is a wonderful blessing that we have. And now what we're looking forward to is the reclaiming of us out of layaway, right? We're all in layaway. We're begotten with God's Holy Spirit, and we're being prepared to be reclaimed by the guy who put us in layaway. And I'm kiddingly, of course, but we are under Christ's blood and consequently reserved to the resurrection coming up here in the Feast of Pentecost. So the question I have today is, what are you doing with the time that you have? Because you see, time is moving ahead. The decades are passing us by. Whether we like it or not, whether we do something or not, guess what? Time continues on by. If you don't do anything, it doesn't stop time. Wish it would. Then I just wouldn't do nothing. I'd just stop it. Enough's enough, But the bottom line is we can't do that. Whether we do something or whether we don't do something, time continues to tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. And Our lives are our legacy. What we've achieved, what we've done, what we've accomplished is the legacy of our lives. It's the story of who we are and what we are. So my point is, I want to bring our attention to something today, and I hope I get through it, that hopefully will give us something to do and to think about in the time that we have left. Because it's very important that we put this that I'm going to talk about in perspective, lest we allow it to hamper, impinge, hold us back, infringe on our life's performance. Now, with that said, let me interrupt myself. A while back ago, and this goes back a while, let's see, I've been in God's church now since I was about 43 years. Yeah, believe it or not, it's longer than I like to admit. But this goes back when my wife and I, we were still dating. We were not married yet. We were still looking for God's truth and kind of jumping from here to there and, going to all these different types of denominations and trying to ferret out the truth. And I remember this one preacher, many of you probably remember him, Rex Humbard up there in Akron, Ohio. And we went up there to view one of his presentations. He mentioned this in passing through the course of his sermon, and it's stuck with me all these years. And during this season, this year, I started thinking about what that statement meant and kind of began to dissect it a little bit deeper. What he said was, you can't go forward looking in your rear view mirror. Now, he said that in context with what he was talking about, of course, but I want to focus just on that thought, okay? Just that one thought. You can't go forward looking in your rear view mirror. So I got to thinking, well, what does that mean? Well, I wrote a few things down. Let me indulge your attention. Well, thinking of this physically, I would say you can't live in the past. Fair statement? You can't live in the past. Can't live in the past. If you're going to have a future, how about this one? If you're going to have a future, let the past go. Let the past go. If you're going to have a future. How about this one? We can hinder our growth by insisting on living in the past. I think that also kind of flies. This is another one. New likes, loves, and richness and feelings of joy will be precluded if we don't release our past. Precluded meaning prevented. You won't enjoy the new richness in life, new joys, new found happiness in life if you insist on allowing your past to be always in the forefront. If we allow our past to define us, we won't mature. We won't change. We'll always default, in the words of psychology, to our coping mechanisms that we coped with in the past. And boy, you don't want to know what I used to cope with in my past. If I defaulted into that, believe you me, I wouldn't be here today in Moorhead, Kentucky, doing what I'm doing. And chances are, neither would you be sitting here listening to my mouth flap. You would be somewhere else, I'm sure, as well. If the reflection of our past defines us, and basically this is kind of like the one before, if the reflection of our past defines us, we will stay the same. Not forgetting our past can cause a lot of unnecessary, I think all of us would agree with this, pain, suffering, and psychological trauma. I mean, people have literally caused schizophrenia to emerge, alcoholism, other types of addiction, other types of malformities in your thinking and the patterns that have caused us to struggle in life in overcoming the things that we know need to be overcome if this embryonic new being in us is going to flourish and properly reflect Jesus Christ in our lives. Last one. Obviously, going forward, and this is probably most important, certainly I think out of many of them, or at least one of the more important ones, obviously going forward while looking backward will at some time, if I'm going to go forward looking backward, I'm going to bump in and damage things or hurt things. If I'm constantly looking backward, attempting to go forward, because the new individuals in my life are going to get hurt because I'm using the wrong coping mechanisms to deal with the present for my future. I have a book here I want to share with you. I've been a member of the American Association of Christian Counselors for many, many years. They sent me a book, a counselor's book. This is not for the counselee, this is for the counselor. But I want to share with you, from the side of the counselor, talking to a counselee, about what we're talking about. This comes from the Baby Boomer Blues. I'm a baby boomer. This is Baby Boomer Blues. It's written by Dr. Collins, Gary Collins. And on page 181, he writes this: "It's easy to play the blame game in our minds. Oh, he makes me drink. She's enough to drive you crazy. Is it no wonder I'm the way I am?" You've heard these things. Yeah, I mean, I grew up with them. I heard my mom and my own dad say some of these things, you know? It's easy to play the blame game in our minds. I can't do nothing. It's my mom and dad's fault. What do you expect? You should consider the way I was brought up. Live in my shoes. You think, you know why I'm the way I am? It was my dad. Well, how old are you? I'm 60. We laugh, but this is real stuff, brethren. And it happens to people, and all their life, they're stuck in the mud, spinning their wheels, looking backwards as they attempt to go forward. I continue. It's easy to play the blame game in our minds, attributing present problems to our backgrounds, families, genetics, unhealthy religious beliefs, or other painful prior experiences. There can be no doubt that early events do affect the present and make life difficult for many people. Counselees can bring psychological and spiritual baggage from their pasts, especially if these counselees have been abused, sexually mistreated, and that happens, and this makes it very difficult in the lives of people as they grow older and try to cope with the things of their memories, or subjected to the toxic effect of alcohol-infested homes. I mean, there are books, I've got books on how to counsel children of alcoholics because they grow up in an environment that is unhealthy. And there are psychological patterns that develop out of that over a period of day after day after day, especially when you're impressionable at the ages of 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 years old, that set certain patterns of the way that little guy or girl begins to think, and as they get older are tainted for many, many years going forward before they finally come out of their fog and say enough's enough, and draws a line in the sand and says, my dad and my mom were that way, but that's not going to define me. I am not going to be an alcoholic. And you set your determination, you set your antenna, you set your course according to your new defined dreams of the future based on your present moment consciousness. It says here, and it goes on, these painful experiences need to be discussed, without a doubt. They do need to be discussed. They need to be worked through. Cathartic discussion needs to be conducted, of course, in some cases, for some to even deal with this and face it and take it head on, because oftentimes that's what is required in order to get through some of these hoops. But with that said, these painful experiences, I'm back quoting now, need to be discussed often in the presence of a caring counselor, but the past must never be permitted to serve as an excuse for doing nothing about the future. Let me repeat that again. The past must never be permitted, never allow the past to serve as an excuse, to excuse yourself from performing, to excuse yourself from growing, to excuse yourself from progressing in your life. Never allow your past to serve as an excuse for doing nothing about the future. Counselees, I'm back quoting now, often need help in facing their pasts, but then they need to put these influences behind so that life can be lived in the present and in the future. And that's so important because, brethren, that's all we have. The past is the past. And guess what? That's history. You can't change that history because it's already happened. The only thing that you can change, the things that you have in control, are today and therefore for tomorrow. Because today can affect the results and the effects of tomorrow. If you're careful, if you're prudent, if you're thoughtful, if you're strategic, if you think through things, and you learn to live in the present. John Lennon had a very profound statement. Many years ago he said this. Whoops. And if I remember it correctly, he said, "Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans." And that is so true. So true. Because we're always planning out ahead. We're always projecting out ahead. Who am I going to see? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And I'm always thinking about it, but I never think about my little grandson who'd like to maybe spend a day with me. You know, or my wife who I haven't taken out a date for a while. You know, not that I haven't, but I'm just saying. You know, or anything that you might like to do that if you don't really take it by force, plan it, and put it into your system of doing things, never gets done. That little round to it, remember? I get a round to it, but we never get round to it. It just always, we go round and round, but we never get to it. And unfortunately, that often happens and is the case for so many of us. It is emphatically conclusive, brethren, that in the circles of psychology, affirmative, it is asserted, it is positive without question, undeniably so, that if you plan on doing something with your life, you've got to let the past go. We're in week 1. I'm in week 6.3. My history's already been written. I've got 6.3 weeks of my life already written in the books. That's a reality check. My legacy is already becoming defined with the Father and Christ, as it is all of us. If you do nothing during these next remaining 42 days, do this. Start taking a tally on everything you accomplish from today until Pentecost, and see what you have produced. What has your performance been? How kind of a person have you been over the next 42 days? Take a tally. Keep score on yourself. How much have you served yourself and your own needs, wants, and desires? How much have you shared yourself with others and have given? How much of your life can be defined as selflessness versus selfishness? How much of that? 2 categories. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Selfish, selfless. Next 42 days. And see what comes up. Take an assessment, evaluation, review. State of the work. God's work in me. The state of the work message for yourself. These 50 days, brethren, should be bringing to us the conscious realization, recognition, and what you could say reference of ourselves in the self-actualized mode of how we're performing within the spiritual responsibilities, obligations, and expectations that God the Father has on us, since He paid such a large price for our salvation. I mean, we're not here just to warm a seat. We're here to work. We're here to be good folks and to be selfless and to learn these principles of rulership, leadership, and selflessness. That's why we've been called. We've been called to become kings and priests in the world tomorrow, without a doubt, ruling and reigning and reinstituting the government of God on this planet. And we need to truly be focused and leaning and our proclivities directed in that area. And it isn't going to happen unless we really take an active, proactive initiative in our lives to do these things. And it may take some planning. I'm going to plan to be a candy striper at the hospital once a week or 5 times during the next 42 days. And maybe just experiment with some things. Try some new things. I just throw that out for consideration. Or go work at Goodwill on a volunteer basis. Or do something, you know, Meals on Wheels. Or is it Meals on Wheels? Yeah, Meals on Wheels. But something along the lines. And lo and behold, you may find out, hey, I kind of like this. Makes me feel good. I've got some time. Or I'm going to go visit people. Or I'm going to call people. I'm going to call one person in the church or in my family or somebody that I find out who's in need. One person a week. Just one person a week. I'm going to do that. You see. But oftentimes life, because it's so brutal on us and cruel, we have a hard time getting out of these, what you could say, routines and patterns that have been, in some cases, carryovers to the patterns developed from experiences in our past that have formed us into, placed us into, have actually constructed us into certain behavioral patterns. Conversion is about changing the way we think. Sometimes we wonder, well, why am I not changing? Because we're not changing the way we process information. We don't change the way we think, the patterns of how we digest information, the way we react emotionally and so on. If we don't get that changed, guess what? We won't change. And so often, brethren, our past has a lot to do with it. Now, I haven't really told you what I want to talk about yet. Because some of you are already saying, yeah, Bill, sure. Yeah, forget my past. Forget my past. Easy for you to say, you know, easy for you to say, easy for you maybe to think it can be done. But it isn't all that easy, is it? No, it's not. Before I tell you what I really want to talk about, I want to bring your attention, believe it or not, we're going to turn to the Bible. Genesis chapter 27. I think all of you are very familiar with this story. Genesis chapter 27. Now in Genesis chapter 27, the story is very, very familiar, I think, to many of us. It regards or concerns Esau and Jacob. And Isaac was on his deathbed. He was having a hard time to see. You know some of the circumstances. As I speak off the cuff here due to time, I will just go ahead and kind of paraphrase for time's sake. And we know Esau went out to get some venison because Isaac liked venison from Esau. It was one of his favorite meals. As a matter of fact, Isaac, we understand, kind of favored Esau, much like Rebekah favored Jacob. And so, in the meantime, Rebekah, the mother, she gets the wild and crazy idea that she's going to get Jacob, her favorite, to fool Isaac. You know the story. And consequently, Jacob successfully, along with the ruse that Rebekah created and caused, fooled Isaac into thinking that Jacob was Esau. And Esau comes back belated after Jacob had already left the tent or wherever Isaac was, only to find out that, yes, indeed, Jacob got the birthright. And then I'm sure Esau said, oh, the oatmeal, the porridge. Remember when he sold his birthright for a bowl of porridge? He was so hungry. You know, he probably didn't really think anything of it. He probably really didn't put a whole lot of value on it. Obviously so, if he sold it for a bowl of porridge. But the point of it is, it did come back to roost. And lo and behold, the reality check for Esau came very hard on him. As a matter of fact, over here in verse 39 of Genesis 27, we read this. At the end of this phase of the story, Isaac his father answered, and he said unto him, Behold, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth. He's talking to Esau because in verse 38, let me go back up to 38. Esau said unto his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice. He lifted up, he was crying, he was upset, he was bothered, he was emotionally disturbed. This was a tremendous disappointment in the life of Esau. An awesome, enormous. And Isaac his father answers in verse 39 and says unto him, behold, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew in heaven from above. And by your sword shall you live, and shall serve Jacob. This is not good, according to Esau. He says here, and it shall come to pass, when you have dominion, that you shall break his yoke from off your neck. So eventually you'll free yourself from him. Verse 41, here's Esau's mental disposition after hearing all this. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. But when he's dead and out of the way, guess what? I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill Jacob. Now, I would say Esau's pretty mad. Rebekah picked up on it. You know the story. Immediately, she said, you know what, Jacob? You need to get out of Dodge. And told Jacob to go to, I think Laban was her brother, if I'm not mistaken, in the story, his uncle. And he went out over in a different land where Laban basically lived. And you know how he worked for 14 years over there for Laban, for the two girls that he got kind of shanghaied in the one with Leah, and then of course finally did achieve the hand of Rachel, which was his main love and main one that he had the attention for. Over here in chapter 31 of Genesis, though, we fast forward the story. And I would venture to say we're probably at least 14 years down the road from when Esau said, I'm going to kill him. If not, maybe 15 or maybe even 16 years. I'm not quite sure what the amount of time was from the time Jacob arrived up there at Laban's location to the time when the clock started for the 7 years, the 2 sets of 7 years. But suffice it to say, we know that it was a minimum of 14, so let's round it up and say 15 years. Just for the sake of discussion, we'll say 15 years had passed. And so now the time comes in verse 54. Let's go 31:54. Genesis 31:54. Then Jacob offered sacrifices upon the mount, called his brothers to eat bread. They did eat bread, tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning, Laban, the uncle, the father of Leah and Rachel, kissed the sons and his daughters, blessed them, and Laban departed and returned back to his land. Jacob, he went on his way. Chapter 32 now, verse 1. Angels of God met him. Interesting, little sidebar here. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now let me give you a little background here. Jacob's on the move. He knows he's going to be moving out of Laban's area, and he's going into a different territory, but he knows geographically he's got to go through Esau's territory. He's got to go through that area. And he knows 15 years ago Esau was going to kill him. So Jacob is upset. He is bothered mentally. He is disturbed psychologically. He is paranoid. He is really going through all kinds of mental anguish, torture, and anxiety over the fact of how he's going to get from point A to point B, and Esau in the middle. This was not a good situation, and Jacob was not really happy about having to deal with this. So he puts a plan together. Now I want you to understand, Jacob is really anxious. He's kind of like maybe Marilyn, waiting to get on the airplane. I mean, he is bothered. He is tormented, in some respects. But as James said, Marilyn, it'll be all right. Just look out the window. But he goes on here and he says, Jacob does in verse 3. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother, verse 4 now, commanded them, saying, Thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob thus said, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. Look, I've got oxen and asses and flocks and men servants, women servants. I have sent to tell my lord, that's Esau, that I may find grace in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came, we saw your brother, we talked to him, and guess what? He's coming with an army of 400 guys. This is not good. This is not good. I don't have an army. And Esau's coming with no women? No women, all men. What does that mean? War, killing, murder. My sons, my wives, my maidservants, and everybody else, and all my cows and cattle. So he's upset. He's upset. He said, and we find this out in verse 7. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. See, I'm not making this up. He was distressed. He was afraid. He was bothered, mentally in anguish. He was really, really besides himself on all this. So he says, well, if Esau's coming, he said, and he divided his people. I'm sorry, back to verse 7. He divided the people that was with him, flocks, herds, camels, into two bands. And he said, if Esau comes, the one company, and smites it. See how he's thinking? Smites it. He's thinking of war. He's thinking Esau's coming to take him out. So he's going to divide his group into two with the intent of saving one. Because if he can distract Esau into attacking one, then the other group will escape and get away. And so he says here, the herds and the camels into two bands, verse 8, and says, if Esau comes to one company and smites it, then the other company which is left shall escape. Verse 9, now Jacob said, Oh God, now he goes back to God and he starts complaining to God. Oh God, my father, Abraham, Isaac, the father of Isaac, Lord, which you said to me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with you. Well, I'm doing that. Here's what I'm doing. But Esau's coming here, you know. He goes on, he says, I am not worthy the least of the mercies of all your truth, which you have showed unto your servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray you, from the hand of my brother and the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And you saidest, I will surely do you good, and make your seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. So he was calling on God to, he's claiming these promises. You told me this, I can't be killed, that you're going to bless me and I'm going to multiply. So I'm calling that promise in here. I'm calling in my chips, so to speak. Save me from Esau. So he lodges there in this location where he's at, in verse 13, the same night, and he took of which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 camels, and so forth. And he delivers them into the hand of his servants, and he puts them in droves. And he says unto his servants, look, pass over before me, go out ahead, put a space between droves and droves. I don't know how many droves there were. There were multiple droves. In other words, multiple groups of animals. And one would come to Esau, then there'd be a space, a delay. And then another group of animals would come. These are all gifts. And all these gifts are coming to Esau and his 400 band of merry men, as they would say. And he puts them in this particular situation. And he commands them, verse 17, the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, whose are these, and where do they go, and whose are these before you, then you shall say, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he's behind us. Tell Esau that I'm behind you guys. And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the droves, saying, on this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when you find him, and say you moreover, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him. You see the intent? He wants to appease Esau with these gifts. He's buying his affection. He's buying peace. This is the way he's negotiating this settlement to allow him to go through the land of Esau, because Esau is standing between him and where he's got to go with 400 men, of which Jacob is bothered, thinking that these guys are there to kill him, along with the rest of his family. So Cutting to the chase here, you know that evening, that's when Jacob wrestles with whom we understand to be the Word, and the name is changed, verse 28, from Jacob to Israel, which is a basic hint that nothing was really going to happen, but Jacob didn't really get it yet. He's going to get it here in a minute, though, from this standpoint. So, at any rate, in chapter 33, here comes the situation. Jacob lifts up his eyes. He looks, and behold, here comes Esau with his 400 men. Now, what he does is he divides the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaidens. He thinks he's going to be under attack, so he takes the handmaidens and their kids, puts them out front. He takes Leah's kids, second best, puts them in the middle. Rachel, his favorite, along with Joseph, by the way, he keeps them behind, hoping that, by the time Esau gets through these guys, maybe he'll be tired and won't get these, whatever. But you see his thinking. I want you to get into his head. I want you to get into Jacob's head. He is paranoid. He is psychologically distressed, disturbed. He is so living in the past, 15 years ago, that he's killing himself. He's running himself through all kinds of hoops and emotional meat grinders. And he's not giving it up. He's actually strategizing with the thought of his wives and kids being killed. I mean, he's really off the grid with this, emotionally. He's crossing bridges, wringing his hands, fretting, worrying. He's into it. And here, look at this, what happens. He puts the handmaidens out there. Verse 3 now. He passed over before them. So now Jacob goes running out ahead of them all. And he humiliates himself. He bows 7 times before Esau. He's bowing. He runs out ahead. He leaves the handmaidens behind him. He runs out ahead. He passes up Rachel, Leah, and the handmaidens, and he's bowing. Oh, Esau. Oh, Esau. He's humiliating himself. And it's amazing what happens here. It goes on, Esau, it says here in verse 3, and he passed over before them, bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Esau, look at this, brethren, runs to meet him, embraces him, falls on his neck, kisses him, and starts crying. I need to tell you, Jacob, what are you thinking? I mean, if Jacob was gathering intel for the special forces, boy, he would have missed this one. He would have missed this one big time, and those 400 guys along with Esau would have been annihilated all for nothing. That's how mistakes are made. That's how things are misread. That's how judgments occur when there's no basis for it, because I won't release the past. And consequently, I create these straw man images that don't exist except in my own mind due to my resistance to release the past. And lo and behold, I contrive and configure a lot of unnecessary, totally unnecessary distress, anxiety, psychological trauma. Oh, it gets better. Look at this. It turns into a family reunion. Verse 5, he lifts up his eyes. He sees the women and the children, Esau does. And he says, Esau, he's crying, he's kissing Jacob. Then he looks up and he says, Jacob, who are all these women? Who are all these kids? Oh, these are my nephews and my nieces. He's going through all these things that basically he can't believe because he hasn't seen Jacob, at least perhaps in 14, 15 years. And the handmaidens, he says here, who are all these children? Verse 6 now. Then the handmaidens came near, and they and their children, and they bowed themselves. So there's Esau, he's standing there, and here come the handmaidens with their kids. They bow and curtsy, and they introduce, I'm sure, the children, and then they move on. And then lo and behold, we have here, then Leah comes with her children, and she bows themselves. And after that comes Joseph and Rachel. So they're all going through, and Esau's getting introductions. I mean, this is amazing. This is just totally amazing. And he goes on in verse 8, and he says, what meanest you by all the droves, by the way? Jacob, also after everybody's introduced, he says, Jacob, by the way, why were you sending me all those animals? What did you send me all those animals for? And, of course, Jacob says, well, I pray you Esau says, I have enough, my brother. Keep all this to yourself. I don't need all these animals. I don't need them. But Jacob twists his arm in verse 10 here, and he says, no. I pray you, if now I have found grace in your sight, that you receive my present at my hand, for therefore I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God, and you have pleased with me. And he goes on here, and of course, you know the rest of the story in this particular case. I wanted to illustrate this, brethren, just to illustrate to you the contrast of the extremes of these two men, and how the one would not release his past, and he was frozen in time. And as a result, it caused him an awful lot of unnecessary angst. I could go on, but I don't have the time to, but let me hearken back to a story there in Genesis as well with Joseph. When he was put into slavery, remember that? He was sold to the Ishmaelites, and all of the situation that went on with Joseph. And you could read that story there. And again, you've got a lot of forgiveness involved. You've got a lot of ruses going on. But those boys who never gave up their past, also his brothers talking about, they themselves were tormented in their minds, in their memories of what they did. Their father, of course, behaving in certain manners with resisting to send Benjamin because of the fact that he didn't want to lose Benjamin due to his understanding that he had already lost Joseph, and all of the troubles that went on in that family in that scenario, which is so also in parallel, many lessons there to be learned about how the past and holding on to the past can really cause a lot of unnecessary behaviors. But I want to bring your attention to something in this story of Joseph here at the end, which I want to add as another ingredient to all of our lives. Turn with me over here to Genesis 45. And before I do that, because I'm going to get into this in a moment, but let me present to you really what I want to talk about. Because I've already passed up on it in regards to this story of Esau and Jacob. Esau had something over Jacob. Anybody have any ideas what it was? One word. One word that Esau portrays in the personification of how he dealt with his past. One word, because that's what I'm talking about today. This is the way, brethren, you mentioned, oh, Bill, remember? Oh, Bill, that's easy to say, but not all that easy to do. Well, here is a big key on how to get forgetting your past done. One word. What is it? Forgiveness. You got it. Class over. That is it. Forgiveness, brethren. Esau forgave. He forgave. And on the basis of that forgiveness, he saw something now that I'm going to introduce to you here in the story of Joseph that also needs to be understood in the context of your life, lest you criticize God, lest you put God in a bad light, and perhaps cause God to be judged by you as though he didn't know what he was doing in calling you. Remember something. God called you for a purpose, and he picked you out. He called you. Remember John? Book of John, chapter 6, 2 times. God does the calling. He draws us to Jesus Christ. God called you because he knows, he recognized out and amongst, I'm going to say it, the 7 billion plus people on this planet, he made a selection. And that selection was you. And that selection is very important for you to recognize. God did not make a mistake. He did not. What we do is we fail to not recognize what Joseph recognized in the context of our lives. Notice at the end of this story, when everything comes to a head, Joseph now is admitting and claiming who he is to his brothers. Verse 1, chapter 45, Joseph could not refrain himself before all of them that stood by him. He cried, caused every man to go out from them. Get away, leave me. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. So only his family was in the room. He told all the servants, everybody, clear out. This is between me and my family. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. I mean, this was loud weeping. Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Does my father yet live? And his brothers could not answer. They were dumb. They were stunned. They were totally drop-mouthed, dumbfounded. And they were troubled. And Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, I pray you. They came near to him and said, I'm Joseph, your brother, who you sold to the Egyptians. Because he's a big dude in Egypt. Joseph had the power to execute and kill. They know human nature because they know how they thought. He goes on here, he says, verse 5, now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves. Forgive yourselves, he says. Don't be grieved. Don't worry. I'm not going to hurt you. That you sold me here to Egypt. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years has the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that put me here. I don't blame you. I don't blame my dad. I don't blame my mom. I don't blame my buddies that I hung out with and did things with. I don't blame them. I don't blame my wife. I don't blame my uncle. I don't blame my boss or the coaches that I had on the football team or the baseball team. I don't blame anybody. I take great, what you could say, comfort in knowing that God has steered my life to the point where I was able to be called and knowing enough about forgetting my past via repentance. What's that all about? Repentance. It's about forgetting your past and moving on in your life and spending the next, figuratively speaking, 42 days of our lives, figuratively speaking, the 42 days that we have left in our lives before the resurrection, to do something with it and to overcome. And to draw the line in the sand immediately, right now, and say, enough's enough. If the past is affecting me and causing effects in my life, holding me back, impinging, infringing on my growth, guess what? As of today, my past isn't having anything to do with it anymore because I'm drawing this line in the sand. And from this point on, I'm going forward without the past having any kind of shoulder rubbing going on with me anymore. It's done. It's done. What it is now is I'm walking hand in hand with my Lord Jesus Christ and modeling after Him the values and standards that He told me I'm capable of inculcating and integrating into my life and my personality to glorify Him in what He's called me to do. Enough's enough. I'm not going to waste any more time thinking about, well, I'm the son of a heroin addict or a meth head or an alcoholic or my dad beat me or sexually abused me. And I know some of these things, brethren, are easier said than done. But if you're going to really go forward, at some point, you've got to make a determination in your life, a choice. You've got to make a choice and say the past is not going to define me anymore. What's going to define me is the here and now, because that's what controls my future. So if I want a lot of money, I'm going to go ahead and get an education because that's what I've got to do. If I want to move, guess what? I'm going to put a plan together and strategically figure out prudently how I'm going to, over a period of short achievement of goals, for the long-term achievement of goal to get there. That's what we need to do. And use the present to launch from. That's key in all of this. And so in so doing, we need to give it up. We need to give many of the past things in our past up, because they really do hold us back. And in so doing, we're told how to do that. Notice over here. Let me share with you just a handful of scriptures over the next few minutes that I have regarding some of the techniques of being able to leave your past in the past. And of course, number one is built off of forgiveness. Number two is understand God is in your life. And He's been in your life both externally and, if you're baptized now, internally. God works with human beings two ways. He draws you externally prior to your baptism in hopes that you'll recognize the calling you're being offered. I don't know about you, but I know for me that there were, if I look back on my life, times that I know God was tapping me on the shoulder, but I didn't accept. I wasn't ready. There's just no way I was ready. But there did come a time, and I thank Him that He never left tapping me on my shoulder, that, you know what, that tap got my attention. And I did turn, and I introduced myself. And I hope at some point, brethren, those of you who are not baptized will do that and accept that calling as a result of God tapping you on the shoulders. But then once He abides in you via that repentance and baptism, now you've got an intimate relationship with God working with you from the inside out to become something that you were not. And if you're going to become what He wants you to become, you've got to give up that past. And repentance is a statement that your past is forgiven and forgotten, and you're moving forward. And so, accept point two, God is involved in your life. And then, some of the methodologies, some of the little techniques, the nuances of moving forward and maintaining this role of forgetting your past, understand what's told to us in Exodus chapter 23. And let me give you a little bit of an assignment here as we go through some of these things. I'd like you to think about maybe somebody you don't like, somebody that's really got you under the gun, somebody that just annoys the daylights out of you, somebody that you're just at odds with, that frankly maybe you would prefer never to see that individual again. Now, with that person focused very clearly in your minds, let's go to Exodus 23 and put this in context. If you meet your enemy's ox or his ass, that's a donkey, going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the ass of him that hates you lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, you shall surely help with him. In other words, look out for your enemy's belongings. Look out for that person's belongings. Let's go to Proverbs 19. Proverbs 19, real quickly here, and read a few Proverbs. Proverbs 19, verse 11. The discretion of a man defers his anger. That is the prudence of a man, the patience, the maturity of a man or a woman, of course. Defers his anger, and it is to his glory to pass over a transgression. In other words, to make the transition, to use it to where you wink at it, you cut some slack, you allow for some space, and you don't take personal offense. You say, well, you know what, Bill's just being Bill, Jeff's just being Jeff, you know, and that's just the way it is. So you cut each other slack from that standpoint. However, the key to that, though, is have a relationship with the individual. Learn to be friendly. Those who show friendliness will have friends. You've got to show yourself friendly to have friends, and certainly friendships begin by being friendly with each other from the start. Chapter 24, over here, verse 17, real quickly. Rejoice not when your enemy falls. There's that individual again. I hope you still have pictured. And let not your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see that you're glad, basically, and it displeases him, the Lord will be displeased that you're glad that your enemy failed, and he, God, will turn away his wrath. Now, don't do this just so that God's wrath stays on your enemy. You know what? That's not the point. But the point of it is, don't look out for your enemies to have evil occur to them. Verse 29 of this chapter, same chapter, Proverbs 24, verse 29, say not, I will do so to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his works, that is God. And you know some of the New Testament scriptures, of which I want to turn to real quickly here in Romans 12, which illustrate again some of these techniques of which we are advised, in this case now by the Apostle Paul in Romans 12, where we're told here in verse 14, bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Learn to be affectionate, connect with people. Learn to understand that the concerns of others are also your concerns. That's why we ask each other to pray for each other, so that we can share each other's burdens in that regard. Verse 15, rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that do indeed weep. Verse 16 now, be of the same mind one toward another, mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Don't be pompous. Don't look down upon people. Don't condescend to individuals. Understand that we all put our pants on the same way. And as a result, we have really nothing over each other in that regard. We're all bought with the same price, the price of Jesus Christ's blood. Recompense no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of men. If it be possible, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, don't avenge yourselves, but rather give place. In other words, eliminate anger. And so often we're angry about our past. We're angry we got the short stick. We're angry we didn't get a fair shake when we were brought up, when this happened to us when we were 5, or that happened to us when we were a teenager, or we were betrayed by our best buddy, or betrayed by our parents, or betrayed by our uncle, or whatever it may be. The fact of it is, we get angry about our past in some cases, carry that anger with us, and it causes a lot of psychological damage in the process. That needs to stop. And God says, give way to it. Eliminate it. Let it go. Cut it loose. Get rid of that tether. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay. So says the Lord. And in life, brethren, things like this happen. Our lives are brutal in some cases, and I think if all of us were given opportunity to share our upbringing, maybe incidences in our past, like give a testimony for lack of a better term, I think many of us perhaps would be shocked in realizing some of the struggles each of us go through. And I've often thought, although it's not certainly recommended, but I've often thought if we wouldn't be healthier in the way of not judging one another if we did know each other in those kinds of details, because we would then be able perhaps to better transpose ourselves into each other's shoes. For a change, but that's not always the recommended way of doing things. However, with that being said, it still does not dismiss the fact that we do need to forgive and forget. And let me show you something over here in Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15 as we round third here and head home on this presentation. Because I want to illustrate something as well, lest we get confused. To forgive is not necessarily to cut someone loose from accountability. You with me? To forgive may not mean you're going to be best buddies. In other words, reconciliation is a whole separate step. Forgiveness apart from reconciliation is possible. Is possible. Just because you forgive does not mean the individual isn't accountable. And by not holding each other accountable, there's only one default role you fall into. You enable. That's why we have Al-Anon. because we don't hold those that hurt us accountable. And not holding those who hurt us accountable, we oftentimes don't confront, because we don't like to confront. So what do? We enable. And guess what that does? That hurts us. And does not do a thing for the individual who is doing whatever is being done. So, case in point, I speak from Scripture in this regard. Acts 15, the Apostle Paul and Barnabas are going at it like a couple of cats on a hot tin roof. And it says here in verse 36, some days after Paul said to Barnabas, well, let's go and visit our brethren again in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord, and let's see how they do. And Barnabas determined to take with him John, whose surname was Mark, and Paul thought, no, we're not taking that guy. That guy abandoned us when we were in the need of him the most. He took off and hightailed it like a coward. I can't trust the guy. He can't be trusted. Barnabas, I'm not taking that guy. I don't want to see him. I'm not dealing with him. Barnabas took issue with that. Barnabas and Paul, it says here in verse 38, not good to take him, Paul did, with them who departed from them in Pamphylia and went not with them to the work. And the contention, see, we oftentimes don't read under the line here. The contention was so sharp between Paul and Barnabas. They were angry at each other. They had a real falling out here because Barnabas was so insistent that Mark was okay, but Paul would have nothing to do with Mark. And so it says here, he says that they departed asunder from one another. Barnabas took Mark. He went to Cyprus. Paul, he chose Silas, and he took off to Syria. So they parted their ways. However, I want to bring your attention to something. Follow me over here to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy. This is an interesting set of circumstances that we find Paul involved with. And over here, Paul is opining. He says here in verse 8 of 2 Timothy chapter 4, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8. We pick up the context. Henceforth, Paul talking, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. And not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. Do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. For Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and departed unto Thessalonica. Crescens to Galatia. Titus unto Dalmatia. These are people that abandoned Paul. He says, only Luke, verse 11, is with me. However, notice this. Take Mark, bring him with you, for he's profitable to me for the ministry. And this was written some decade, about a decade or so later, after that fallout of Barnabas and Paul. So here Mark did recover himself, and Paul forgave him, and in this case, reconciliation occurred. It occurred. And you can read here another story over in the book of Galatians. Notice this. In the book of Galatians, here the Apostle Paul walks into a public eatery of some sort, and the Apostle Peter, he was in there sitting with a bunch of Jews, and Barnabas was with him. You know the story, chapter 2. And when some Jews from Jerusalem walked in, some of the what are viewed to be the chieftains of the church walked into this eatery. Peter, who was sitting with Gentiles, got up and walked away, creating what appeared to be some type of a segregationist, racist move. And Paul took Peter to task publicly and corrected him right there in front of everybody in a public venue. I mean, took him to task and basically took him out, as they say, at the back 40 and spanked him right there in front of everybody and told him, and you can read this, for the sake of time I won't, but I wanted to bring your attention to that. However, some years later, over here in 2 Peter, I want to take your attention now over to 2 Peter. Peter, who was corrected, and about some, 16 years later, nevertheless, now, I don't know if Peter and Paul were best buddies, but I do know that they do have a healthy respect for each other based on these words that Peter wrote. Because here's what Peter says, and in verse 14 we read, "Wherefore, beloved, seeing that you look for such things, be diligent that you may be found of him in peace, without spot and blameless, and account that the long-suffering of our Lord is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given to him, has written unto you, and also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they are who are unlearned, unstable, rest, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction." But I want to mention there, I read over it fast, in verse 15, even as our beloved brother Paul. So Peter held no angst or animosity for that as well. You can read also in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1 through 5, the incestuous individual, and then, of course, Paul's appeal to the congregation of Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, 1 through 11, Paul's appeal for the Corinthian church to forgive this guy who now wants to come back into the congregation and be reconciled. Now, these are all examples of reconciliation. Forgiveness with reconciliation. But there is, and let me take you over here now to Matthew 18. Matthew 18. There is certainly forgiveness without reconciliation, because sometimes, brethren, as pointed out here in the process of attempting to be reconciled, if it does indeed result in not reconciling, we're told here, verse 17, "If he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto you as a heathen man and a publican." But it says nothing there about not forgiving him and letting that go. Because that individual, if indeed he doesn't apologize, doesn't repent, guess what? Doesn't mean forgiveness can't happen. Forgiveness is not predicated on an apology. That's something that we all have to recognize. Sometimes forgiveness has to come from deep within, and you have to initiate, generate, and make a determined decision to stop it and not allow it to affect your life anymore. Because the individual may be dead, or the individual is just not built that way, let's face it. And they're not going to apologize, and needless to say, are not about to repent of their ill will or wrongdoings. That's just the way, unfortunately, life is in today's world. But that does not mean, brethren, you cannot forgive to begin that platform to launch from, recognizing full well God's involved in your life, and then through the implementation of these values and standards, these nuances of behavioral patterns, begin to inculcate them into your thinking, into your rationale, to hopefully help you change in the present for a better future that will glorify God even more so in the years to come. That's so important, so important. So, truly, brethren, do make a decision, do the best you can in trying to forget the past, and consider this particular scripture. Because if you don't remember anything, remember this. And let me leave you with this over in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 11. Because this is basically what I've been talking about right here. Through the act of forgiveness, it will help you to accomplish this very piece of advice the Apostle Paul gave to the Corinthian church in the love chapter, chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, verse 11. "When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. I coped with things in my life from a childish point of view when I was little. Those coping mechanisms that I implemented, whether it was getting even with my brother or doing something dastardly to purposely inflict something because somebody did it to me, those coping mechanisms are over. Because guess what? I'm not a child anymore, see. That's the point of it. And Paul says it very clearly here, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And that's important, that we do not use the coping mechanisms of our past to contend with the issues we're contending with and addressing in our present. If we do, it will affect our future, and it'll sell you short. It'll sell you short every time. You will not maximize the gifts that God has called you to express and to grow into. He called you because He knows you have the right stuff. He will never test you beyond that which you cannot handle. He's the greatest coach that you could ever have. And because He's the greatest coach that you could ever have, and if you've ever had good coaches, I've had a few good coaches in my small life when I played sports in high school and so forth, and not one of those good coaches, I say good coaches, wanted to cut me out or cut my legs out from under me or discourage me. It was always, Bill, you got to do this. This will make you better. This will make you better. Trust me on this. If you just learn this particular habit, I've often used getting the ball out of your glove. I used to play shortstop. Get the ball out of your glove a little faster. Do it this way, and you'll earn another half second to a second. That could mean the difference between throwing the guy out at first or missing him, because that's just the way it was. Don't stand that way. I used to stand with one foot always leaning, so I would be breaking towards second base real easy. But if it was a shot down between the third baseman and me, or down the third base line, I needed to back up the third baseman, guess what? I'm already a half a second late because I got to pull this. So he told me, you spread yourself, you're even, so you can go either way, you see. Little things, little fundamentals. But what would I do if I'd say, no, I'm not, I know better. See, I know better. Guess what happens? I'll continue to get hit on over here, and I'll continue to miss those balls by a half a second. They'll go through the middle, And the coach will finally get mad at me and bench me probably. But my point is we have to understand that God is our best coach, and He's out to improve us. He's out to maximize the gifts that He saw in you when He called you. When He tapped you on the shoulder, He knew what you were at that time, and He saw potential in you. That's what He saw in the life of Joseph. That's why all of that menagerie of him being sold into slavery wasn't all that bad. He came to realize that was all providential. It was all providential. And I would be foolish if I would stand up here and say my life doesn't have a sense of providentialness to it. There is providential meaning to my life, as there is to your life as well, if you believe God's involved in your life. I happen to believe God's involved in my life. And I certainly would think many of you, if not all of you, you should believe God's in your life as well. So brethren, don't sell yourself short. Forget the past. Move on. Utilize the present to maximize your gifts for the future.